Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. First of all, I am so excited to see that so many of you have joined me on Substack. For those of you who don't know already, I have a recovery Substack, which is letsrecover.substack.com. It is essentially kind of like a blog meets Recovery Talk podcast in written form. You can subscribe for free and you will get the latest articles sent directly to your email inbox. Or you can upgrade to become a paid subscriber and access my bonus podcast episodes. Paid subscription is $5 a month and you can cancel whenever you want to. Kind of like a Netflix for recovery in a way. I really reconnected with my passion for writing lately, so I have written a lot of Substack articles that are just waiting to be posted, but I want to spread them out a little bit, so that's why I don't want to post everything at once. So yeah, thank you for your support as always, whether that is on my Substack or listening to this podcast, sharing my work. I really do appreciate it. And also, before getting started with today's topic, I also want to say, for those of you who have signed up to my waitlist for one-on-one coaching, I'm really sorry, but the wait time is going to be quite long. And if you are looking for urgent support for your eating disorder, it may be better to seek out someone else. Because first of all, the wait may be very long. And also we might even find that you are maybe not the good candidate for coaching or we were not a good fit. So please don't postpone recovery because of wait times. Instead, seek out a different form of support now. And then if you maybe are in a space in the future where you still feel like you would need a bit of coaching, that's fine. Then I may be available at that point. But unfortunately, wait times are very, very long right now. And I'm saying this because I get a lot of emails of people asking, I've been on the wait list for a while. What is going on? And I am really sorry for the inconvenience, but I'm just one person. And I also have wanted to prioritize more group coaching instead, just because this allows me to work with more people at once and then reduce wait times. And also it is more cost effective for participants. So yeah, I am genuinely very sorry about the wait, but it is a little bit out of my control because I am just one person, right? I'm running my Substack, my podcast, my group coaching, my one-on-one coaching, and I'm doing all of these things at the same time as I'm running on a little bit of reduced capacity due to my own health situation, which unfortunately is currently not very great. But anyways, guys, let's get started with today's topic, which is the 4 R's of recovery. So some of you may have heard that I have mentioned this concept before of the 4 R's, but I realized I haven't really done a podcast episode where I discuss it in depth, what it is, what it means for you. So essentially, the 4 R's is what I view as the pillars of recovery. So if you think of recovery as a house, right? You need to build that house on a steady foundation, or think of it as building it on 4 pillars. And if you take away one pillar, the house is going to fall. So the 4 non-negotiable R's of recovery are refeeding, rest, restoration, and reprogramming. So in this episode, I'm going to explain a bit more about what each of these are and why they are so crucial for full recovery. And also what happens when people neglect one of the 4 R's. So let's start with refeeding. Refeeding essentially, as the word may suggest, refers to food, right? You need to eat and refeed yourself properly in recovery. So often we hear the narrative that, an eating disorder is not about food. And even though it can be about more than just food, I think that what sometimes the trap people fall into when they say, it's not about food, is that they neglect actually focusing on the refeeding aspects of recovery. But you cannot recover from an eating disorder just by intellectually thinking your way out of it. You need to eat your way out of it too. Eating disorders are mental and physical, and the refeeding process helps both your mental health and it also helps your physical health. And by not targeting the refeeding, you're essentially keeping yourself stuck mentally and physically. We know that a lot of the behavioral changes that we see in eating disorders, a lot of the mental symptoms, actually are directly related to the state of undernourishment. I have explained this in more depth in previous episodes. One that I will recommend is the one I did on the Minnesota starvation study. And this study essentially shows that underfeeding people actually induces eating disorder-like symptoms in people even without eating disorders. Refeeding essentially means getting your body out of that famine state mentally and physically. And it's so important to remember that when you have an eating disorder and you've been restricting yourself, you are correcting a huge energetic deficit. Therefore, refeeding doesn't necessarily mean just quote-unquote eating like a normal person. Probably will mean eating a lot more than that. Because a normal person isn't correcting in a massive energetic deficit and repairing this immense damage that this energetic deficit has caused. And yes, refeeding is important and necessary even if you are not so-called underweight per BMI, which we know is a little bit of a BS measurement anyways. So refeeding essentially means getting your intake up, right? Getting you to eat a generous, sufficient amount for eating disorder recovery. And I want to remind you that when it comes to recovery, there is no such thing as too much, but there is such a thing as too little. And then we have the second R, which is rest. And rest is sometimes overlooked by people where they think, oh, I can focus on, eating more and challenging myself, but I am not going to rest. But rest is absolutely essential for your mental and physical recovery. We know that in eating disorders, the compulsive movement actually ties into being in an energetic deficit. And essentially, restriction activates movement and movement activates restriction. If this is very new and confusing to you, I would recommend you checking out some previous episodes where I discuss, rest and exercise. And especially one episode where I talk about the adapted to flee famine hypothesis by Dr. Sean Gussinger, which explains how compulsive movement ties into eating disorders and also why rest is so, so important. When I talk about rest, I don't just necessarily talk about excessive extreme exercise like going and running a marathon, right? I also talk about that sneaky lower level movement, such as those compulsive walks that you're going on, or that compulsive lower level movement, the ways that exercise sneaks in more subtle ways. But even if your movement is not necessarily outright disordered or extreme, your body still needs rest in recovery. Your body is run down, your body needs to use this energy for repair. So going and running around is not really an ideal thing to do when you are in recovery from an eating disorder, when you're recovering from a body that has been overexercised, suppressed, restricted, damaged. You need rest. So the next R is restoration, and this refers to weight restoration to one's set point range, but also it refers to the internal repair that happens in recovery. For example, restoring hormones, a normal hormonal and sexual function, increasing your metabolism. It refers to repairing internal organs and the damage that's happening there. It refers to, healing your bones and restoring bone density. Refers to, if you're someone who normally menstruate and have lost your periods, refers to, normalizing your cycles, getting your period back. Overall, it refers to restoring your weight and restoring everything else physically that is going on and that is harmed by your eating disorder. A very common trap that people fall into is that they are maybe eating enough for weight gain, which we know when you're energetically suppressed, you can eat very little and still put on weight, but they're not eating enough for the metabolism to heal and for the body to truly heal, or for the brain to truly heal. Another very common trap is setting the so-called goal weight just way too low. Remember that we all have different set point weight ranges. So if your set point weight range is more, let's say in the BMI 24-25 range, and your goal weight is BMI 21, then you would still be underweight at a BMI of 21. Even if that is what your treatment center said, yeah, that is your goal weight, right? So that's a very common trap people fall into when it comes to weight restoration. So overall, restoration means giving your body enough energy to restore its necessary weight that's been lost, and also restore metabolism and all of the damage that has been happening inside your body that maybe you can't see, and letting your body reach its natural set point weight range. As I have spoken about in previous episodes, it is very normal to experience temporary weight overshots. This will tend to taper off with time, and essentially it's just the body being like, hey, you've starved me. I want to hold on to just a little bit more in case you're starving me again. And this will also explain why you see chronic yo-yo dieters actually end up gaining more weight long term. I want to remind you that you can't decide your set point weight range. This is already genetically decided for you, just like you have a height, set point height or a set point shoe size. And again, it is not an exact number. It is more so a weight range that your body thrives in and will try and fight to get you in. And it won't function properly if you are intentionally suppressing it. And that's, of course, something the eating disorder, of course, hates to hear, because the eating disorder is like, well, can't I just recover but then stay thin, right? But that desire for thinness, that is probably the eating disorder in the first place, right? So it'd be like recovering but doing it on the eating disorder terms. That's not how it works. And then we have the last of the 4 R's, which is reprogramming, or as some people may call it, rewiring. And that essentially refers to reprogramming the eating disorder brain, right? And the way that works is that our brains are actually neuroplastic, which means that new experiences create new neural pathways. So you actually can change your brain on a biological level. So the reprogramming is essentially challenging and changing or interrupting the disordered habits, behaviors, disordered beliefs, disordered actions, everything disordered. You are challenging, interrupting, and creating new experiences, and therefore changing your reality. The key when it comes to reprogramming your eating disorder behaviors is that it is action-oriented. You can't think your way out of this. You have to act your way out of this. And you have to be consistent. So often people think that they can just challenge a fear food one day and boom, all the reprogramming is done. No, you have to keep doing it until it no longer scares you. And also be mindful of the more sneaky behaviors. This is very often where people are stuck. The more sneaky, subtle behaviors. And they think, oh, but that's no big deal. I can just keep doing those sneaky little eating disorder behaviors. No, this is how the eating disorder stays overdue. You want to target all kinds of sneaky behaviors. This is typically a job that you may do with an eating disorder recovery coach, right? Also sometimes a therapist. Unfortunately, sometimes in traditional eating disorder treatment, the reprogramming or rewiring part is overlooked, and instead all the focus is on the restoration and the refeeding, which of course is very, very important. But I will also say that reprogramming is what takes you to that full freedom. And reprogramming is a funny one because overall, you may find that it takes a bit longer than some of the other R's. For example, the weight restoration process may feel like that happens quicker than the rewiring or reprogramming part, right? Might take some time to rewire certain fears, whilst weight restoration is something the body will prioritize that may happen a bit quicker. Even though this, of course, is individual. And also, when it comes to reprogramming, there are certain things you might find that you can reprogram really fast. I see this a lot, for example, people who do all-in recovery. They may find that they get over certain fear foods very, very quick. So the timeline is not linear, right? And everyone has different R's that they may struggle more with than others. For some people, the rewiring or reprogramming part is kind of easy and straightforward, but they find that they enter hypermetabolism, and the weight restoration is a never-ending struggle of them having to force feed themselves to push up the weight. Or other people may find that everything is easy except they really struggle with the rest part, and that is just what really holds them back, right? So when you look at these 4 R's, you may find that one is more difficult than the other. So I sometimes say that there may be a 5th R. I would say this R is something to especially focus on after recovery, and that R is rediscovery. And this refers essentially to rediscovering yourself and who you are, what you are, and who you are outside of your eating disorder and also outside of recovery. It's about reconnecting with your, true self, your identity, your interests, etc., etc. I call this the 5th R and call it almost like a bonus R because I believe that when you're going through recovery, you may find that focusing on the 4 R's is the most important part to do first, and then the rediscovery part may come later. I believe that the rediscovery part is also where therapy can come in very, very handy. For example, if you have any traumas that your eating disorder was essentially suppressing, then you might find that going through therapy, working on that can be a helpful part of your rediscovery journey. Figuring out, what have I been struggling with that the eating disorder has just suppressed? And this is just so important to get forward. You don't necessarily have to do all the rediscovery work before you can start your eating disorder. Very often people think that they need to know exactly who they are and find their true self before they can start eating disorder recovery. But you need to focus on the essentials first. You're not you when you're hungry. So if you're going to try and figure out your true self when you're starving, it's not really going to work because you're not in your true self, right? Your brain is not there. Instead, focusing on these 4 essential R's beforehand takes you to a place where you can approach the rediscovery in a better way. You can actually be like, hey, okay, who am I when I've taken out the undernourishment, for example? And so often people think that they need to go to therapy and figure out and solve all of their traumas and childhood issues before they can start recovery. But I would actually say that you should start on the essentials first. Start with the refeeding, start with the rest, start with the restoration part, right? And then you can find that this takes you to a place where you are more you and less eating disorder. And then you can go to therapy and actually be receptive for that and investigate productively. I've said this many times before, but I'll say it again. When I started treatment for my eating disorder 10 years ago, my psychologist was very clear that you are not going to be fully receptive to any kind of therapeutic intervention and talking therapy right now because you're undernourished, right? We need to focus on sorting that, and then we can start talking and digging and investigating. And in retrospect, I am so grateful for that because I see so many people with eating disorders who spend years ruminating in therapy without actually going anywhere because there is no focus on the food, right? There's no focus on the fact that they need to eat more and that they need to restore their weight. They need to rest, all of these things. So I believe that a helpful approach is looking at these 4 essential R's first, and then the rediscovery part will come later. Of course, you can do some rediscovery in recovery, right? You might find that whilst in recovery, you rediscover your interest in gardening or whatsoever, right? That is completely fine. But don't feel like you need to have yourself and your whole life figured out in order to start with the first important steps of recovery, such as refeeding, resting, restoration, and also reprogramming and challenging yourself, challenging your fear foods and also your fear situations. So, the 4 R's. Back to the 4 R's. When I work with people with eating disorders, I very often will start with this concept, either with the person or I will keep it in the back of my head when I'm first talking with them. I will discuss or reflect, has this person worked on all of the 4 R's? And very often when I work with people with eating disorders or talk with them, I'll quickly realize that there is 1 or more R's that they haven't really targeted. Sometimes it could be that none of the 4 R's have been targeted at all, but a lot of times I'll see that maybe they have slightly targeted one, but they neglected another. And then it can be so helpful to realize that, oh, okay, now I see where I went wrong. I tried to enter recovery, but I was refusing to focus on the restoration part, for example, or I was just completely neglecting the rest part. And then I was wondering, why is recovery not working? And this can be very helpful to be aware of because when you know about the 4 R's, you can create an approach that works for you, right? So if you know that, okay, I have been neglecting one of the R's, then you can work on implementing it. So if you are someone who is in recovery, feeling quite stuck or not had the best success in recovery, have a bit of a think about these 4 R's that I mentioned and whether or not you have fully targeted them all. Because very often people will maybe consciously or subconsciously avoid certain aspects of recovery. And the aspects of recovery that they are avoiding is actually very often the exact aspect that they really need to target. You can challenge all the fear foods in the world, but if you're just completely neglecting restoring your body's weight to its set point weight range, you're not going to be fully recovered. And be really honest with yourself. What kind of the R's are you really avoiding? What kind of actions in recovery are you really avoiding? And if you find that is difficult, have a bit of a think of what is it that scares you the most? What kind of recovery-oriented action is it that makes you the most scared and you have the most resistance towards, right? What kind of recovery action is it where your eating disorder comes and tell you, oh, you don't really need that, right? If you are in treatment for an eating disorder and if you are quite stuck, it could also maybe be helpful to mention this concept to your treatment practitioner so that you can together target and create a plan that is more directed towards where you are still stuck. You can maybe tell for example, your therapist, hey, so I've been thinking a bit about where I am stuck, and I kind of concluded that, when it comes to the rest aspect of recovery, I just find that I'm dreading it, I'm avoiding it, and instead I focus on other things. And this is so common in recovery. I see it all the time as a coach, right? That the topic that a client is very often deliberately avoiding bringing up in a session is very often where they really need to work, right? And this can be difficult for a therapist to realize, right? If you're never bringing up your relationship with movement or just kind of dread it, then how can your therapist know, right? So it's so important that you take some initiative and remember that this person is there to help you, but you need to help them help you. I think another very helpful approach could be to take a bit of a step outside yourself and think, what would you recommend to someone else who was in your situation, right? And if you could continue recovery whilst ignoring this specific R or how many of the R's you are avoiding, wouldn't you be recovered now, right? So for example, if you could recover and just not focus on rest at all, wouldn't you have been fine by now, right? Wouldn't you have been where you want to be by now, right? Because very often we just kind of keep repeating the same thing, expecting different results. But at the end of the day, if that was working, it probably would have worked by now. When it comes to each of the 4 R's, I did just go through them a little bit, superficially. I didn't go in great depth just because that would have taken a lot longer than I think I would have had time for in this episode. But I have discussed the concepts in the past. For example, I have discussed exercise in recovery. I have discussed the importance of rewiring or reprogramming and challenging your fears. I have discussed, set point weight. And I also recently did an episode on why I believe a food-first approach is so important. So it could be worth checking those episodes out. I also will definitely continue explaining this concept and the different 4 R's, whether in this particular podcast or also in my Substack, because again, I think it can be a very helpful approach. And when I have used this approach with clients, whether one-on-one or in the group coaching program, which I am currently doing, it has often had a very positive response, and it has helped people go out of that mindset of just being completely paralyzed and deer in headlights and, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And instead being like, this is where I need more work. This I can target. So have a bit of a thought of your 4 R's and what is it that you currently are doing okay? And what kind of R's is it that you have been avoiding to work on? And how can you target that specific R? And now I'm going to have a listener question. And the question is, the person is essentially asking, I'm rephrasing a little bit here. Person is asking if it is okay to exercise, including quite intense exercise in recovery, if you're someone who genuinely really enjoy it. And here's the thing. If your body is broken down, restricted, tired, exhausted during your eating disorder, even though you may not necessarily feel that way, we know people with eating disorders, they can be really starved and have a body that's physically broken down and actually feel very, very energetic. Check out the adaptive to flee famine hypothesis for more information on why this is. But yeah, anyways, if you have a body that is tired, broken down during your recovery, it doesn't necessarily matter if you really enjoy exercise or not. Your body is not going to be like, oh, I'm completely broken down and exhausted, but because you really mentally like this, I'm not going to care about the damage. That is not how it works. It also could be worth investigating your resistance to a break. If you have a body where you know that objectively, realistically speaking, it's going to be better for your body to rest, yet you feel extreme resistance towards doing so, then chances are this resistance is the eating disorder. And also, if you really enjoy a form of movement, wouldn't it be better to take a step back and actually be able to approach this when you are in a healthier space instead of your eating disorder joining in? Because we know that you can enjoy a form of movement and it can be distorted at the same time. I see this over and over where people have a specific sport or activity that they really, really like, but the eating disorder has tagged along. And if you really enjoy movement, doesn't that make it even more important to be able to do without the eating disorder joining in? So overall, can you exercise in recovery? I would say it's individual, but I think the majority of people would benefit from as much rest as possible in recovery for physical and mental reasons. Nevertheless, I'm not here to tell you, you can't do this, you have to do that, right? Because that's not necessarily my role. And I don't necessarily know you in your exact situation. But I can say that overall, I think the majority would benefit from more rest and actually working on investigating their relationship with exercise so that if you genuinely do enjoy it, you can approach it when you are in a healthier space, mentally and physically. I have done episodes on this in the past. Check out the episode that I have done, which is titled Exercise and Eating Disorder Recovery. I also have recently written a Substack article titled What About Walking, that you can also read, where I talk about walking and eating disorder recovery. So head to letsrecover.substack.com for that. And I have also done podcast episodes on walking, lower level movement, step counting, etc. etc. So definitely check out some of the previous resources I have as well around that. And if you are struggling with compulsive movement and don't quite know why or understand what's going on, then I definitely recommend also the episode I did on the adapted to flee famine hypothesis, because this explains compulsive movements and urges to move and what it's actually about. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for your ongoing support for this podcast and my Substack, and for spreading the word. Really appreciate you guys. Have an amazing week.